Okay, just to start with the usual bits and pieces you have to show at the beginning, but who's involved with CADU and the HF being the main funders so far to this project. Other people involved, HENEB, we were at Dublin Archaeological Trust when we actually did the field work, and other people there are the Pembrokeshire College and Planet, who's a local action group who involve communities in their work. And TWI is I'm not sure it still exists actually, it's a company associated with Port Talbot Steelworks, and they got involved because they have a very big 3D X-ray machine. So lots of people, different organisations involved. And it started out with this. And it's a phone call to Adam Gwilt of Amgueddfa Cymru, National Museum Wales. You see there saying, you know, I found a Celtic chieftain's chariot burial. And Adam's response was, yes, oh yes, really. And then Adam phoned me and I sort of gave the same response, saying, yes, you know, oh yes, really. And then Mike Smith forwarded these photographs of the things he'd found, which on the right, it's a turret ring, and on the left-hand side, it's a horse brooch of presumed at the time late Iron Age origins. So that's where it all started. We all get very excited by this, and not least because those who work in Wales, and particularly Southwest Wales, artefacts are, to say at least, few and far between. I've worked on numerous Iron Age hill forts, defended farmstead sites, and normally after sometimes several months excavation, you walk away with a spindle whorl and a couple of flints if you're lucky, and that's it. That's your finds for the period. It's a ceramic, and so you know, to find anything is unusual. To find sort of material this quality was quite staggering. So just to give a bit of background, this talk I normally give to sort of local groups and other societies and things, just to put some sort of flesh on the bones, as it were. And just on that reminds me to say that we don't get bone surviving either. It's very acid soils, and so nothing survives whatsoever, which again is a bit of a downer when you're doing this sort of work, particularly when you're hoping to get both animal and human remains on this sort of site. But anyway, just one thing about chariots is that they're a bit unusual in the fact that they are sort of, no one's, to my knowledge, has used a chariot for over a millennium, perhaps even longer, but they've never been lost in the public consciousness. And there's Boudica fighting the tourists on Westminster Bridge in her chariot and with her daughters. And even you have to supply your own music to this particular photograph here, which I'm sure you can do, the famous Chariots of Fire music. And there are references to chariots, quite well-known ones from the classical authors, in particular here about the way the British charioteers rushed about in a noisy display. So they've never really lost their almost notoriety in the popular imagination. So when you find a chariot, as we did here, then it sort of takes off in the public's imagination about what was happening, what these things were used for. And there we are, some, you know, just general reconstructions. One on the right, it's rather sedate to my mind, but there we are. And reproductions have been made. Here's a couple. I'll say a bit more about this at the end, but they are reproduced in small numbers. And just a reminder about our knowledge of chariots in the rest of the UK. And probably you're all aware that East Yorkshire is where they are found in, I wouldn't say great numbers, but where they are found in most commonly. And outside that, they're virtually unknown. And there, on the very nice alkaline soils of that part of the world, you get bone preserved in very good condition. So here's a male charioteer buried in the box of the chariot, with the ponies, the two ponies, actually upright in a running position, placed to the chariot. In this case, the Pocklington one was the chariot seemed to be intact into a very, very large grave where the horses, the chariot, and the person was buried in one. But more usually, it's on the bottom left where the actual chariot is dismantled and the person laid across the chariot wheels. And both female and male charioteers are known. This is a famous, well-known one here, with the horse is not present, but the bridle bits and other fittings are placed in a position where you expect them to be in relation to the horses' heads themselves. And these date to around about 300 BC, give or take, whatever, half a century or so. And there's just a reconstruction of what that may have looked like at the time of burial. So back to the one in Pembrokeshire. This is after we did the excavation. You can see the backfill trenches there, a very unexciting field. Nothing on the surface in the field itself to indicate there was anything unusual taking place there. One of many, many pasture fields you expect to find in West Wales in their thousands, if not tens of thousands. And just a bit of note about Iron Age burials in Wales and the Iron Age generally, just a bit of context, is that we know exactly where people lived. We have several thousand hill forts, defended enclosures, defended farmsteads, enclosed hut groups and so forth across the whole of the Principality. But this map's a bit out of date now, but it gives you an idea of just how few burials actually we know of, and not quite counted on one hand, but we're probably up to about sort of 30 or so sites known, and no real tradition has been detected. We get cremations in isolated positions, cremations in or outside hill forts, inhumations, crouch burials, extended burials, a whole variety of different things. So no one tradition has ever been, and probably there isn't one to identify. So getting both artifacts and an Iron Age burial together is of course very unusual. So what happened first of all is that the National Museum, with some funding as well from Cadw, enabled us to go out for just essentially almost like a long weekend to do some initial work there. And so the first thing to do was geophysical survey, a very small area to start with, which was done by Tim Young of GeoArc. And initially we thought that what we were going to do here was in fact just a hoard of material. And many times I've been out with colleagues looking at find spots of Mesotectus finds of mostly Bronze Age, but sometimes later stuff. And you find nothing basically. It's a hoard pit which has been completely emptied by the detectorists, and there's no context whatsoever. In this case, quite clearly, what you've got there is the big signal in the centre, the white blobs, is ironwork, and the surrounded by a ring ditch. So quite clearly some sort of context going on there before you even did some extra work in the ground. And when that was expanded a bit further, that's the site of the Chariot burial, which is just shown in detail. Quite clearly other ring ditches, burial sites further out, other anomalies, which are ditches, defensive ditches, because what was really surprising on this is when we dropped the actual survey into a LiDAR survey, is that the Chariot burial lies outside a previously unknown Iron Age promontory fort, a trivalate promontory fort, which has again got three big banks and ditches cutting off a small triangular area which are then defended on the other sides by very steep slopes. It's a classic Iron Age site for southwest Wales, which are known. There's probably about 70, 80 of this type known. So that was a real eye-opener. I mean, first of all, how can a site of such quality and size just escape notice ever? Because when you actually look at it on the ground, that's the size of defences. They're pretty big. It's a big defended site. I say completely unrecognised by archaeologists. The farmer and his family are quite aware it was there. And that's just a topo survey of that Pembrokeshire fort. There's probably space for about, I don't know, 10 roundhouses in that interior area of the fort. So say with a bit of funding from CADU and from the National Museum, we went out and just did a bit of, say, less than a week's work on site, including the geophysics. We just wanted to actually get some sort of idea what was going on, what and what did survive in the ground. And you see the top right there, you can see the burial pit of the Chariot showing up there. The hole in the centre is where the horse brooch, a large artifact, was extracted from, and the right-hand end of the ranging pole is where the turret ring came from. And the bottom photograph, I don't know if you can see, but anyway, if the two people working there, you can just about make out the tops of the Chariot tyres, the iron tyres beginning to show. So straight away we had a good idea of what we were dealing with. Just a couple of things to mention. First of all, it's extremely dry, you can see there, and also the geology is not easy to work on. This typical geology you get in southwest Wales is not good at the best of times, and this was particularly difficult, but it's something I had to deal with. So armed with that knowledge, there's just one of the artifacts coming up there. There's a bridle bit, which complements the one found by the metadetectorists. You can see it is, we didn't dig any holes there, it is just below the topsoil. And that's the collection put together, just so you have what you know that in total. So two bridle bits, one in poor condition, fragmentary, the other one pretty much complete. The horse brooch top right, strap unions bottom right, and a turret ring. And normally, I don't know if you know how turret rings work, but you expect to have 4 with 2 ponies. It's where the reins pass through to the rider, to the charioteer. And so you'd have 2 small ones for each pony, a rein through each one, and then all 4 reins would come through to the main turret ring, which is that one there you see, which we attach to the pole of the chariot. And the decoration here is classic late Iron Age. Adam Grossman Museum puts it perhaps around about 70 AD, give or take a few years. It's got no Roman influence whatsoever. And there are a couple of other picket turret rings found in southeast Wales, which are similar but have a slight Roman influence. Often they have bits of yellow glass and yellow enamel and other colours on them, which does indicate the Roman influence into them. These show no such influence whatsoever. Anyway, armed with the knowledge we'd acquired from the geophysics and the small scale evaluation, we obtained additional funding from the HLF, and also CADU were generous enough to put in a big contribution as well, which enabled us to do quite a lot more work. At that time, it wasn't just doing the excavation. We wanted to involve different communities of people as well. And so that's when we started to engage with Pembrokeshire College, Sixth Form College, and Planet, this local action group, and through them, we were able to get about 10 or so students involved in the project, doing various bits of work, various bits of involvement. Some of it was excavation on site, some it was filmmaking. They made short film on the site. They visited the museum and helped with looked at some of the conservation work, and went down to see the X-ray stuff at Port Talbot Steelworks, all this sort of stuff. And also, a lot of the excavation was done by volunteers. We have quite a big volunteer cohort in Heneb, and we were able to engage them. Some are very skilled volunteers. Some actually have got probably more experience than a lot of field archaeologists. So it all came together as being quite an exciting community project. We were quite careful about security at the time. We were a bit worried that the news was going to get out about the work taking place here. So we did employ a security guard on site when we were not there for 7 days a week. But in fact, it was we did find out towards the end of the project that it was probably unnecessary. Was we had to park our cars about 500 meters away by a big electricity substation, and we learned subsequently that it's a strategic substation which feeds the electricity to the Milford Haven oil refineries and to the power station there. And it's an immediate armed response is undertaken if anything suspicious happens. In fact, one of our volunteers started to take photographs of the substation, and within 5 minutes, 2 police cars drew up, wanted to know what was going on. So our payment of a security guard for several weeks was rather unnecessary. Anyway, there we see that bottom left photograph. You can see the ring ditch quite clearly showing up there as a soil mark, and then the small trial excavation holes we dug the previous year. What became apparent pretty quickly was that the ploughing of the site had damaged caused quite a bit of damage. The ring ditch shows there, and the parallel lines are plough marks. The field had been used for potatoes on several occasions, hence the deep ploughing. And it's quite clear that the 2 detectorist holes there and there had been hit by the plough previously, probably bringing those artifacts to the surface. In fact, these little marks here, little red figures, are where we found artifacts dragged from their original position, presumably in the grave itself. So one suspects if we hadn't, if Meteorite hadn't made his find and we hadn't done the work, another couple of years of potato ploughing could have really, we could have lost the site essentially, or lost the artifacts from the site. So that's one of the decisions which actually prompted us to do the excavation fully. The other decision was the fact that we thought it may become a bit vulnerable to more detecting as well. It was, I think, the windiest site I've worked on for a long time in March. We had a shelter which we couldn't put up for the first 2 weeks of excavation. It was just too windy, and our portaloos kept blowing over. So it wasn't very pleasant at times, but eventually it did calm down and we managed to get a shelter over. And you can see here the bottom left, just the tops of the wheels, the tyres being to show there and there, and there's a sword, an iron sword there. This was done by what we were then dubbed Archaeological Trust, and the National Museum staff, particularly our 2 conservators, came down as well to lift the artifacts. And we were lucky enough to have John Lewis, who specialised in ironwork, which was very useful because it's to get his ability and his knowledge to actually lift these objects was really invaluable. And that's the sword. You can see there pretty poor condition. The ironwork was not good, but there it is. And you can see the two rings which were held a scaffold onto a belt or whatever. And again, just how unusual these objects are. You can see a distribution there of those swords from the UK, with the only other known one attached to a burial from Wales is from Anglesey, which was I think found in 1908. So we can see that virtually the whole of sort of Wales and Midland England is sword free, as it were. And this was lifted in one go with the conservators, the National Museum, wrapping it with layers of cling film and plaster of Paris, and then managing to lift it complete and get it onto a board to take to the museum. Oh, there it is being done. It wasn't easy. As I said, the subsoil, the geology is pretty intractable. And of course, it looks okay there. It has some quite big sort of stones and boulders embedded into the top of the geology, which made trying to get a steel plate underneath that to lift it was virtually impossible. But it was done, fortunately, in one piece. What's very unusual about the site was that the grave itself wasn't that deep, but the chariot was complete. And what they'd done was simply dug a very shallow grave and dropped in the wheels and the chariot into two deeper slots dug into the deeper subsoil. So essentially, they didn't bother to dig a huge grave. They were quite economical with what they were doing. And you see there that the condition of the two wheels, iron tires, which had become compressed over time, and also the naves, the hubs, surviving in pretty good condition. They both dropped slightly, but they're all there complete with the linch pins. And it looks as though, you see from the bottom left photograph, as though the nave, the hub, had a sheath of bronze wrapped around it, very, very thin bronze, almost tinfoil thickness bronze as decoration. And again, these were lifted pretty much intact as far as we could do so. The tires had to be taken out in sections that had already broken, but the hubs themselves, the naves, were again wrapped in cling film and plaster of Paris and lifted as one big unit and taken to the museum. And that's just what it looked like in section. You can see how the tires themselves have been compressed down as the wood's rotted over the years. The bottom bits surviving obviously pretty much intact. And so again, they were lifted in those sections as much as we could. And that's the plan as post-excavation. The grave was too shallow for the ponies to be included in it. So we assume they were not there. You can see the deeper holes dug to put the wheels in the ground and where the objects came from. To the bottom right, the ring ditch was perennial with what looked like some sort of entrance, and within that area were two pits which we interpreted as graves, and to the north, just outside the ring ditch, another deeper pit, which again we interpret as a grave, and we did phosphate sampling on these features, and indeed there is enhanced phosphate in both of those, so it does seem to confirm that there were graves. They were just samples of samples taken to do that phosphate, which again we can do full analysis soon, but I don't think it's going to confirm much more than what we know already. And some of the samples we took, which we did paleoenvironmental analysis on, were very disappointing to say the least. The only real good sample was from this small pit just here, which turned out to be which looked very promising on the ground, but just turned out to be smashed up oak charcoal. So that side of things was rather disappointing. And that's the site as excavated. In the bottom left-hand one, you can see the electricity pylon, which sits on the ramparts of the Iron Age fort. One thing we did was to expand the geophysical survey outside the area of what was known. The interpretation's a bit better on this one. So what it does show is actually there's an awful lot going on here, which is not visible apart from through geophysics. So that there's a site of the Chariot burial. That's the Iron Age promontory fort. That's a very large ring ditch there. This here is an outer defensive bank, and this is an outer defensive bank. So there's 3 sets of defences to this promontory fort. And what's really interesting is all this stuff over here. I think it's about 12 other ring ditches there, which some have central grave pits in them. And this is a ditch, a trackway. It would seem that the approach to this fort would have been along this trackway. As you approach the fort, you'd have passed on your right-hand side these 12 or so burial mounds, quite clearly meant there to be seen as you approach the trackway. You got to here, and you turn along the edge of a very steep slope, past a very large round barrel burial mound in a rectangular or square enclosure, presumably through a gateway here. Along here, past the burial mound of the Chariot, which again is its own little enclosure, through another gateway to this defensive ditch and bank here, through another gateway there, through a gateway on the outer bank, another gateway here, and then the main gate would have been here, which has been extensively disturbed by a big, massive badger set, unfortunately, and finally into the actual internal area of the fort itself. So really quite a big ceremonial enclosure way into the fort. There does seem to be another, we think, another possible chariot burial just there. So on the basis of this, we did a lot more work on other similar sites in the region, geophysical survey, again, generously funded by CADU. And although nothing spectacular this has been discovered, everyone has turned up evidence, things happening outside these forts, including other burial mounds, which may be Iron Age, maybe Bronze Age. Again, you can't tell until you actually do some excavation or whatever. Well, what's interesting about these group of ring ditches here, that if they are Bronze Age, it's probably the largest Bronze Age cemetery, perhaps in Wales. If it's Iron Age, then it's a unique feature, unknown elsewhere. And one of those ditches I just mentioned, so this ditch here, we put a trench through just to see what the size were, and that's a very hefty defensive ditches, about 4 meters across, 2.5 meters deep, with evidence of Roman material about 2/3 of the way up, particularly evidence of Roman ironworking with a few sherds of Roman pottery within them as well. And these are some of the results of the initial post-excavation work that's been done so far. Unfortunately, that it was progressing, the post-excavation work, and then COVID hit, and things were put on hold for some time. At National Museum, the staff weren't allowed back into the museum for, I think it was over a year, and so things just sat there for a while. But these are the X-rays done by TWA at Port Talbot, That's the sword. You see it has broken. There's one of the rings which have held the scabbard on a belt. And it does seem, though you can't really see it so clear on this particular X-ray, it does seem to have a bone or ivory handle attached to it. And this is one of the naves or hubs to the chariot. And what you see there is a linchpin, which is iron, but with a bronze decorated loop at one end and a bronze fitting at that end. That's a faint outline is the bronze sheath which went on the outside of the hub, presumably decorated and at the time hardly polished, one imagines. And really interestingly, which is not visible at the time of excavation, inside the hub is an iron bearing for the spin upon the axle. A couple of the other bits of extremely corroded iron which were there, which made no, because you couldn't determine what they were at the time, just chunks of iron, are these two things. One's a chape, which is the end of a scabbard, iron chape, with a tip of a blade in it broken off. And the other one's a spear ferrule, which is the blunt end of a spear, as it acts as a counterweight to the heavy point. And both these were sloping down into the ground, as it were. The top ends have just been lost to ploughing, presumably. And interestingly, the only other chariot burial known outside East Yorkshire is this one at Newbridge in Scotland, where they came up with exactly the same solution as the one in Pembrokeshire, where they dug deeper slots to drop the wheels of the chariot in. But interestingly, this is 400 BC, whereas ours in Pembrokeshire is around about 70 AD. So interestingly, it's the same solution over 400 years apart. And this chap, Robert Herford, came to visit us. His occupation is chariot maker, and he was very excited by what we found. And he did explain in great detail about how the techniques required to make a chariot, particularly chariot wheels, which the ones from Pembrokeshire are slightly larger than the ones from East Yorkshire, which are around 90 centimetres diameter. Ours about 110 diameter. And to make a wheel, first of all, you have to obviously make the ash spokes and so forth. The hub or nave, you have to turn, you have to turn that quite carefully, but also to make it hollow. So just make a solid piece of wood, it is hollowed out as well. And then you have to, again, this is based on some of the East Yorkshire ones, but there's no reason why ours isn't the same, is it's the actual rim. The wooden rim is made of a single piece, usually of ash, and you have to steam it for about 24 hours to make it pliable, and then make it onto a mould, a formwork to make it curved while it's still pliable. And one thing is quite interesting that he noted, he said, is not sure. It's about 12 feet long, a piece of ash to make a wheel. I'm not sure how they would actually steamed something, what material they would use to as a steamer in the Iron Age, to get something that's 12 feet long, to get a constant steam for about 24 hours is be quite difficult. Now it's just done in waste. He does it in a piece of wood, but normally use it a piece of drain pipe, plastic drain pipe. And then you have to make the iron tire, and the iron tire has to be made exactly too large to fit the wheel, sorry, too small to fit the wheel, which then heat up, drop on the wooden wheel itself, and chuck water over it to cool it down so it contracts onto the tire and holds it in place. And then you've got to make the bronze work as well, and particularly the one we have, quite complex, thin bronze work sheath as decoration. So all those skills have got to come together to make just one chariot wheel. I have been struck by this, by the amount of skill required and the knowledge that they had at the time. And just when you see reproduction or Iron Age houses rebuilt, such as Castle Henley's in Pembrokeshire, other places as well, just how crude they are when they actually had all these skills available to them. They could have made something a lot, in some cases, if they wanted to, a lot fancier. So just one of the sort of spin-off things which has sort of made you think about how things were looked and the ability and skills people had in the Iron Age. That was the end of the first stage, and we're just about to move now into the second stage of the project. And this is Mel Giles of Manchester University with CIfA Cymru, because they're both research organisations, can apply for AHRC funding, which they've done so successfully. So you have £1.2 million worth of AHRC money on the Chariots in Cynefin, it's called, a project, which involves us as well, involves Heneb as a partner. Again, investigating a bit more about the find spot and the other parts that go with it. To archaeologists, as a conservator, I believe from speaking to Adam today that the advert for conservator is going to go out very soon to work on the objects, do some experimental archaeology. The idea is to make two chariots, two reproduction chariots, one as a museum example, as it were, and one as an experiment to see how it would have worked and to take out to the community and do displays and so forth with that. And also work with the local community in South Pembrokeshire to actually promote, and as it says there, to increase a sense place of belonging and place for that area. So that's where at the moment we're hoping to have the first meeting of this second part of the project in the very near future to make things going. And you see there that Robert Herford, the chariot maker, will be engaged to make two chariots and have little exhibitions and so forth. So I think let's watch this space, I think, is what's going to happen here. I think that's how I end of my talk, I think. John, is that okay? What's the time? A bit early, but I took some things out thinking I wouldn't have time, but I obviously have. So I'm open to any questions or where the future direction is going to go.
Please do. So many questions. Well, I mean, what a extraordinary find, and how lucky that the detectorist reported the finds, enabling the excavation to take place. It's a remarkable story, and I think it's probably a very great privilege for everyone involved, well, to be involved with that project. So yeah, absolutely mind-blowing.
Yeah, I would just say, I forgot to mention that the obviously museums acquired the objects. They were declared treasure. There's two separate treasure cases. One for initial finds made by the metadetector, and then one when we did the excavation. And both sets have been acquired by the museum, I think with the aid of a grant from an independent organisation.
Thank you for clarifying that. Right, I'm sure there must be lots of questions. Open up to the audience, please.
Yep.
I think Emily's got a question.
Emily.
Yeah, I've got one. I know you said that preservation is really poor, but how do you know for sure that there was a burial there and it's not just a chariot?
Yeah, good question.
Bit devil's advocate-y, sorry.
No, it's okay. No, we're not certain at the moment. We have got some samples somewhere the burial came from. They've not been analysed yet. So we're going to look at those. It was some sort of quite look like almost like Greece, as it were, where you expect to find the person. So I'm wondering whether we can do DNA on it. I'm not sure if it's possible yet, but that's something we can do as part of this project. I mean, the alternative, of course, it could be animal skins laid down on the Chariot box, which you're seeing there. But no, we can't be certain. But then every other one, certainly from East Yorkshire, had a burial in it. So one would hope that's the case. And also having the weaponry there would suggest it's with a person.
So I kind of ask because we found a warrior burial, so not a chariot burial,
Yeah.
but one of the warrior burials of the, I guess, South Coast-ish tradition.
Yeah.
In Warburton, and there was no skeleton there, and we think there was quite relatively poor bone preservation on the site anyway. So at first we thought that it is just disintegrated, but I think now we're of the opinion that the skeleton was never deposited in the grave, that it is sort of indicative, it's an absent burial. But yeah, it's just I don't really know much about warrior burials, but I know a little bit about this one, and it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean it's possible. But so hopefully we can answer that question. I mean we didn't take the other ones, the two burials outside the ring ditch, we did 10 centimeter phosphate samples across those areas, and it's quite clearly that then it shows there was enhanced phosphate. So the assumption is you've got a burial there. I mean,
right, cool.
But then we didn't do it over the central. It's quite difficult to do over the central bit because it was so all the stuff was there, so it's difficult to sample. We did take sort of spot samples, I said, though, so that may help.
Cool.
But so
Thank you.
I have no idea if DNA would actually is possible.
I don't know.
I don't know. I know you do it on Paleolithic silts in caves, so I don't see why it's not possible.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So Ken, I had a question. Was this a one-off in Wales? Can we anticipate more chariot burials kind of either at this site or elsewhere? And you casually dropped in that there's the possibility of a second chariot burial at this site, and then you kind of shared that wonderful graphic, the illustration showing the promontory fault, the access kind of trackway, and you explained that the cemetery, that's the one. I mean, there's that's a lifetime's work in its own right. What's next for the site? You've talked about the finds, but
yeah, it's a bit of a tricky position, which you probably know of, John. So the promontory fort and a chunk of the site's been scheduled. So that bit there, and sort of coming across about there, it's been scheduled. The problem is, which may become resolved soon, is that the farm was in an agri-environment scheme, Glastier, as it's called in Wales. And although the farmer was happy for the site to be scheduled, the whole lot to be scheduled, the problem is if scheduling also means if you go in Glastier, then it's not allowed to do any ploughing whatsoever, even light ploughing of a site, even though under scheduling, under class consent, he could do, but under the Glastier agri-environment scheme, that's prohibited on scheduled sites. So on one hand, he wasn't unhappy about the site being scheduled for that purpose, but he was because of Glastier, which stopped him doing, even light agriculture on the site. So it got a bit of an impasse. But now Glastier is running out and not been replaced yet, as far as I'm aware, by anything. So I'm not sure what's going to happen. There's things like this bit here. We would like to have gone. Is this another enclosure out here? We would have liked to have done a bit of work on these ring ditches to see actually what date they are. That'd be extremely useful. But at the moment we're a bit stuck because of this various sort of management issues. So yeah,
Right.
so that's what. Yeah, it's a bit awkward. It's no fault of anybody. It's just the way it is with the glass tier and other things.
Yeah, that interplay of different factors. Thank you.
Yes, yeah, but he says
yeah.
we haven't said that. The farmer and his family were extremely, cooperative and really useful and helped us out a great deal. So there's no problem in that that side of things. It's just that he said this is his best potato field.
Yeah, and somewhat typically, I mean, if Cadw had scheduled, the obvious, which is the promontory fault, we probably would have drawn the boundary rather closer to the monument than where the chariot burial is.
Yeah,
if
yeah,
we'd followed our non-statutory scheduling criteria. So it's just it's a really useful case study in what might lie beyond the obvious.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I say you would have missed all the interesting stuff, as it were. The other thing, which is again just on the management side and under these agri-environment schemes, is that they used to graze the promontory fort, and then under Glastier and the previous agri-environment scheme, they were told not to. It's damaging it, so it's getting all scrubbed up now. Was actually light grazing over that would be ideal to keep it free. It's getting to the point where you can't really get into the interior because of blackthorn scrub, which again is going to damage the below ground archaeology.
Yeah, well, Louise Mees are sorry, carry on.
Sorry, it's just interesting, this sort of conflict between the various sort of management processes, which you think you're all working in the same direction, but actually sometimes you're not.
Well, Louise Mees, our regional inspector of ancient monuments, is on the
oh yes,
the workshop, so I'm sure she'll make a note of that. We have a couple of questions in the chat. So Anna has asked, did you say that you were replicating the metalwork to mount on the chariot and also the bit, etc.?
I think the idea is to replicate everything. Actually, we have already got replica metalwork done as part of the first phase of the project. So we had 2 turret rings and 2 strap unions made, which are perfect replicas, which I could have actually, if I thought I could have got them out. So one for us and one for the museum, which when we give talks, we take them out, show people. They're always really impressed just how heavy they are. So the idea is to make a complete replica chariot with all the fittings that go with it. I'm not sure whether they make the swords and spears as well, but I'm sure for the museum display one they will do. I'm not sure you want to take a sword out to schools and so forth.
Yes, interesting risk assessment there. And then a final question, I think, from Lila. Could you please repeat the info on the phosphate graves? How can you determine if it is from animal or human? Great talk and contextual approach. Many thanks.
You can't basically. You can tell. You just get enhanced rates of phosphate in the bottom of the graves opposed to on the outside, which just means you are assuming it's a human grave. It could be animal grave. I mean, obviously you get enhanced phosphates in whether if you get intense manuring across some sort of water fields or whatever, then that happens as well. So you have to be careful how you interpret it. That's why I just wonder whether DNA is a way forward for determining this, but I say I have no idea if that's possible or not. But all you can say is you've got a grave-shaped hole which has got enhanced phosphate readings in it.
Great, thank you, Ken. That was an absolutely magnificent presentation. Thank you so much. I hope that everyone enjoyed it as much as I did. It's quite a spellbinding site, really.